Whenever you are.
My claim of fact states that the United States drug policy over the past 4 decades has caused more harm than good. Richard Nixon said in 1972, "We've turned the corner on drug addiction in the United States. Drug addiction in the United States is under control." Now, almost 40 years later, this cost us over $1 trillion, 40 million arrests of nonviolent drug offenders, and the largest prison population in the world. Drugs are easier to get, cheaper, and more potent than ever. I'm going to prove to you through statistics, expert opinion, and my own opinion based on facts that the drug war benefits the drug dealers more than us. The leader of a cartel is typically extremely intelligent, rational, has many networks, and has a large supply of drugs and cash. My first point will show how the current drug policies in place are not effective in reducing the cartel supply. The drug policy established by Ronald Reagan was to go after the supply and simply reduce it. These tasks include eradicating the supply, decreasing production, increasing the production costs, and decrease the number of sellers. The growers of cocaine have adapted them by making multiple small grower operations all spread out in the rainforest. I'll explain in my next point that the DEA will never be able to reduce the supply of drugs by a significant amount. Because of such large profits, the drug cartels have just as much access to the same resources as governments. Therefore, they increase technology, increase distribution, increase consumers' capital, and finally increase corruption. As Richard Davenport puts it, it's not the supply of a drug that turns a user into a criminal, but the illicitness of that supply. And criminal sanctions against drug trafficking may be well-intended and may provide temporary success, but overall, the primary role of these laws is a business incentive. What he means is that because these drugs are illegal, they create a high profit solely because they are illegal. Efforts to prohibit narcotics just increase their value. The policies do not have a big impact on drug trade because the demand for drugs is inelastic. An inelastic good is one that has a nearly constant demand even if the price goes up or the supply is reduced. Based on the fact that narcotics are inelastic goods, it can be concluded that no matter how much you reduce the supply, the demand will stay the same and the price will just go up even more. A solution to cutting supply could be to provide poorer countries with aid so that farmers don't have to rely on illegal drugs to make a living. Perfect example of this, Afghanistan, one of the poorest nations, and now they produce 90% of the opium plants used for heroin production. That information came from the CIA World Factbook. My next point deals with the amount of money spent to enforce the drug policy. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the United States has spent nearly $100 billion of taxpayers' money since 2001 enforcing the drug policy. Surprisingly, only about a third of the money goes towards drug prevention or drug treatment, which fights the problem at its source. Based on these statistics, it is clear that we need to invest more money in curbing the demand and reducing the money spent fighting supply, because there will always be a supply while there is a demand. Now I will show you why stopping the import of drugs into America cannot reduce marijuana usage. The following stats come from the U.S. Department of Justice website. In 2006, 14.8 million Americans were marijuana users. In 2006, 42.3% of high school seniors reported using marijuana at least once in the past. This shows that marijuana is a serious threat to reducing the amount of drug use in America. According to Dr. John Getman from the Marijuana Production in the United States for 2006, marijuana is the largest cash crop in the United States, more valuable than corn and wheat combined. Instead of trying to reduce the supply of drugs, we should concentrate our efforts on reducing demand, increasing education on the effects of narcotics, and make drug rehab facilities more available. All this will lead to a better outcome. Decriminalizing possession of marijuana could greatly reduce overcrowding of courts, jails, and rehabs. The following comes from the Los Angeles Times article, Mexico Under Siege. The majority of those killed in Mexico drug wars are teenagers between age 18 and 25 years of age. Since Mexico's president declared a war on drugs, 7,337 people have been killed in correlation. That is more people killed than in the U.S. casualties in the Iraq War. Mexico has one of the highest kidnapping rates in the world. An average of 70 people are abducted each month. Also, Phoenix is considered the kidnapping capital of the United States. In conclusion, this drug policy has managed to cause the death of thousands of Mexican teenagers, the highest incarceration rate in the world, increasing police budgets, overcrowding of courts, wasting of billions of taxpayers' money, and increasing in drug-related crimes. According to the U.S. Department of Justice in 2007, 83.9% of high school seniors reported marijuana being easily obtainable. That means about 6 out of every student can find marijuana. So what has the drug policy solved? Well, the answer is nothing. Drugs are even easier to get than before, prices have not changed, drug use has not decreased, the number of drug cartels have increased, the cartels do not fear the U.S. government, terrorists receive profits from our demand, and it created instability in many countries. My solution to America's greatest national security threat is to concentrate a large portion of the drug policy budget to drug prevention and drug rehabilitation. If this does not work, then the only thing we have left to do is end drug prohibition and regulate narcotics through pharmacies. However, my opinion is based on all the information I have obtained, and that the current drug policy is the biggest U.S. failure in history. It is up to us to make a change of policy, and without your help, the United States drug policy will continue in a downward spiral until we hit rock bottom. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my argument.
All right, Robert, the claim's pretty clearly labeled. There's not really a setup of what the contents of the speech are going to be. You do a pretty good job signposting those supporting claims as they come up. I did think that you provided good background information, and there's a couple of places where you have good explanations of what the whole process is and what the relationship between enforcement and availability is supposed to be. The claim about demand being inelastic, I think, is asserted. You've got an economic claim that you're making, but there's some presuppositions that need some development there. You had some good examples about Afghanistan, for instance, and Mexico. There's statistical information on use rates, but again, you made the comparative statement that it's easier to get, it's more widespread, but we need more of that comparative data. And I got a lot of data about what's available now and how recently people have used or what the total numbers of users are, but we don't have a context in which to compare that. Is the percentage higher or lower than it was 40 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago, whatever the comparative base is going to be for your argument. You're pretty consistent about citing your sources. I thought that was excellent. You do sometimes get mixed between the general drug arguments and the marijuana arguments. It might be easier to focus on one or the other. Toward the end, you get a little sidetracked on making policy arguments, and the policy arguments don't get developed very well in terms of their effectiveness. For instance, the alternative that you were suggesting about spending money on anti-education efforts or discouraging consumption, those sorts of things. I thought that was underdeveloped. Your presentation is a little problematic. You get into a routine, you just kind of keep going through it. At the end especially, right when you get to the exit, it just really sounds like you're reading too much. And so you need to be a little bit more invested in the presentation to build some ethos. All right, thank you.